Imagine this. You're standing in a recording room where the groove is locked, the band is comfortable, and the song is already good enough. The drums are steady, the bass knows its place, the guitar is behaving. Then suddenly Prince raises his hand, everything stops. Silence crashes into the room harder than any wrong note. He walks back, reaches for his guitar, and strikes a chord no one was prepared for. In that instant, the song is no longer safe, and neither is the band. This is not a story about perfection. It's a story about disruption as survival. Prince stopping a band mid-song was never about ego. It was about control in a world designed to take it from him. That single chord, sharp, unexpected, almost confrontational, was a declaration. Comfort is the enemy of truth. And in Prince's universe, truth was the only thing worth protecting. At the center of this moment is a thesis that runs through his entire life. Prince believed that black artists could only remain free by refusing to play the role assigned to them, even if it meant unsettling everyone in the room. The stop song wasn't a tantrum. It was a warning. There's a rehearsal in the late 1970s, early in his career, before the legend was fully formed. The band is older, more experienced, trained in the traditional hierarchies of funk and R&B. Prince is young, small in stature, but already carrying an almost unbearable sense of musical urgency. As they play, the groove settles into something familiar, something that would sell, something executives would understand. Prince lets it go for a few bars, then he stops them cold. He doesn't yell, he doesn't explain much. He plays the chord instead. The musicians exchange looks. That chord doesn't belong. It bends the harmony in an uncomfortable direction. It threatens the entire arrangement. But Prince insists again and again until the band is forced to follow him somewhere unfamiliar. That's the first hidden layer of this moment. Prince wasn't just changing the sound. He was retraining obedience. You're taught to believe bands are democratic. That collaboration is equal. But Prince understood early what many black artists learned too late, that democracy in music often ends the moment power enters the room. Producers, labels, radio, white-controlled systems that decide what black creativity is allowed to sound like. Stopping the band was his way of interrupting that pipeline before it solidified. And here's the uncomfortable provocation. How often do you mistake comfort for chemistry? How often do you applaud smoothness without asking who was silenced to achieve it? Prince's war with the industry didn't begin in courtrooms. It began in rehearsal rooms like this one. Every stop song was a rehearsal for a larger refusal. A refusal to let others dilute his vision for the sake of marketability. A refusal to let black sound be reduced to something predictable. There's a reason musicians who worked with him describe these moments with a mix of fear and reverence. Because when Prince stopped the band, he wasn't just correcting notes. He was exposing habits. The habit of playing what's expected. The habit of staying inside tradition. The habit of not challenging the leader because the leader is young or black or too intense. And intensity, in Prince's case, was always read as a threat. The next chord he played that day didn't just alter the song, it redefined the band's identity. Suddenly the rhythm had teeth. The melody felt dangerous. The music stopped trying to be liked and started trying to be honest. That honesty is what made Prince impossible to replace and impossible to control. This moment echoes forward through his career. In studios where executives begged him to simplify. On stages where audiences didn't yet understand what they were hearing. In contracts he would later destroy, rename himself over, and publicly rebel against. The stop song was the seed of all of it, because Prince knew something most artists are trained to forget. If you don't interrupt the process will interrupt you. And that single chord, sharp, defiant, unapologetic, was his way of saying that the sound of freedom is never polite. The second time Prince stopped a band mid-song, the stakes were higher. This wasn't a rehearsal anymore. This was identity on the line. By then, the industry had already started circling him with expectations. Executives heard genius, but only on their terms. They wanted the funk without the friction, the sexuality without the danger, the black brilliance packaged neatly enough to sell without frightening white radio programmers. And inside that pressure cooker, the band learned to play it safe, sometimes without even realizing it. That's when Prince halted the music again, not because the notes were wrong, but because they were obedient. There's a studio session whispered about by musicians who were there but rarely speak publicly. The track was tight, radio ready, the kind of groove that would slide easily into playlists without resistance. Prince listened, head tilted, eyes closed. Then he opened them and cut the sound with a single gesture. He reached for the guitar, stepped into the center of the room and played a chord that fractured the mood. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't friendly, it demanded attention. This is where the thesis sharpens. Prince didn't stop the band to assert dominance. He stopped them to prevent erasure. Because every time black music becomes too smooth, too acceptable, something essential is lost. The risk, the truth, the refusal. And you're invited to ask something uncomfortable here. When was the last time you were unsettled by music that truly mattered? Prince understood that comfort is how systems tame revolution, that once the sound becomes predictable, ownership follows. The band had learned the language of success. Prince was trying to unlearn it in real time. This wasn't easy for the musicians. Some resented him, others feared him. A few walked away, because following Prince meant surrendering the safety of tradition. It meant accepting that tonight's audience might not applaud, that radio might hesitate, that executives might push back. But Prince had already chosen his side. His war with the industry wasn't loud yet, but it was already total. Every stopped song is a small act of sabotage against a machine that feeds on repetition. Every altered chord was a reminder that black creativity was never meant to be comfortable property. And here's where the cultural weight deepens. Prince was a black icon forming himself inside a white-controlled system that rewarded predictability and punished deviation. Other artists learned to negotiate. Prince learned to interrupt. Where compromise was offered as survival, he chose confrontation disguised as musicianship. That chord, unresolved, tense, became a recurring language. You hear it later in his catalog. In the way his songs shift suddenly, in how they refuse to land where you expect, in the way genres collapse into each other without permission. Rock bleeding into funk, funk colliding with new wave, masculinity folding into androgyny. The band stopping was the first lesson. Nothing is fixed. There's a moment on tour where a similar interruption happens live. The crowd is dancing. The band is locked in. Prince stops them anyway. The audience murmurs, confused. Then he starts again, slower, darker, more deliberate. The room changes temperature. People don't know whether to move or listen. That discomfort is intentional. Prince wasn't chasing applause. He was chasing transformation. And transformation requires breaking the spell of expectation. You're often told legends are born from talent, but Prince's legend was born from refusal. Refusal to let the band coast. Refusal to let the song settle. Refusal to let black sound be reduced to background pleasure. The musicians who stayed learned something radical. Prince wasn't asking them to follow him. He was asking them to abandon what they thought they knew, to trust that the fracture would lead somewhere truer. And this is the hidden cost of genius rarely discussed, the loneliness of being the only one willing to stop the music. Because stopping the band means everyone looks at you, blames you, questions you. Prince carried that weight willingly because he understood the alternative, blending in until the system owns you completely. Every time he cut the sound, he was asking a question that echoes beyond the room. Who controls the rhythm of your life? The band's sound changed that day. Sharper, stranger, unmistakably his. And with that change came risk, but also immortality. Because Prince knew that history doesn't remember the songs that played it safe. It remembers the moments when someone had the courage to stop everything and choose truth over approval. By the time Prince stopped the band again, it was no longer just about sound. It was about ownership of the self. The chord that changed everything didn't simply reshape arrangements. It reshaped power. Because once the band learned to follow Prince into discomfort, the industry realized it could no longer predict him. And unpredictability, especially from a black artist who refused containment, is treated as a threat. This is where the stop song becomes prophecy. Soon after, contracts tighten. Executives begin to talk about guidance, about focus, about helping him reach his potential. Language that sounds supportive but functions as control. Prince hears it clearly. He has already learned, in rehearsal rooms and on stages, what happens when you let others decide when the music is finished. So he refuses again, this time not with a chord, but with his entire identity. The symbol on his face years later, the name change, the public rebellion. None of it appears suddenly. It all traces back to those early moments of interruption, when he learned that stopping the flow was the only way to prevent being absorbed by it. The band was practice. The industry was the real fight. And here the thesis reaches its deepest truth. Prince stopped the band because he knew that if he didn't, someone else eventually would, and they would stop it in a way that erased him. Other artists complied and survived quietly. Others resisted and were destroyed publicly. Prince chose a third path, constant disruption, never allowing the system to settle around him long enough to trap him. But this choice came at a cost. Isolation, exhaustion, misunderstanding. Being labeled difficult instead of visionary, dangerous instead of brilliant. The same traits celebrated in white rock stars were framed as instability in him. The same refusal called genius elsewhere was called arrogance when it came from a black man who would not soften his edges. You're invited to sit with that injustice, because Prince carried more than music on his shoulders. He carried the burden of representing possibility in a system invested in limitation. Every time he stopped the band, he was also stopping a narrative, the narrative that black artists should be grateful, cooperative, quiet. And yet, the stop song gave birth to something enduring. The band's sound evolved into something no one else could replicate, sharp, angular, alive. It frightened some listeners, liberated others. It influenced generations who would never meet Prince but would feel permission ripple outward from his choices. This is the legacy of interruption, not chaos, but authorship. Prince understood that freedom isn't found in endless motion. It's found in knowing when to stop, when to say no, when to break the rhythm everyone else depends on. In the final years of his life, stories circulate of him rehearsing alone late at night, looping the same progression, stopping himself, starting again, still interrupting, still refining, still unwilling to let the music become automatic. Even then, he refused to coast on legend. That may be the most radical part of all, because the system loves frozen icons. It loves myths that no longer speak back. Prince never allowed himself to become silent, even when the world struggled to keep up. So when you return to that original moment, the band mid-song, the raised hand, the silence, you see it differently now. It wasn't impatience. It wasn't perfectionism. It was survival coded as artistry. Prince's next chord didn't just change the band's sound. It changed who was in control of it. And in a culture that has always tried to own black genius while fearing black autonomy, that act remains revolutionary. The music stopped. The truth entered. And nothing sounded the same again. Legends may fall, but their truth always rises.